Hey, welcome to the Pharmacy Residency Podcast, member of the Pharmacy Podcast Network. Just a reminder, if you're looking for some help with your letter of intent and getting recommendations, you can go to residencyhelp.com. And then if you want to work one-on-one with me, my contact information's there, or you can just hit me up on LinkedIn at Tony Pharm.D or Facebook at Tony Pharm.D1. It's $75 to work with me for the residency season, and my focus is going to be on your LOI, but still going a little bit back and forth with some of the candidates as we're kind of answering those little questions that you just kind of need somebody that's been on the other side of the table to talk to. So without further ado, let's get on with the show, talking about reducing residency stress. Burnout, to get a better idea from the researchers who are doing the stress and burnout research, and find out a little bit more about what the research and data show, and then what they can tell us. So, guys, welcome to the Pharmacy Residency Podcast.
Thanks, Tony.
Thanks, Tony.
Okay. Hey, what first of all, how do you guys define burnout?
Well, so burnout, obviously is a hot topic, and some of the research, how they've categorized it is in three domains. And the first is, are you just exhausted, right? Are you physically tired? Another is, do you feel like you don't have autonomy in your work? You're not really able to work towards any goals, self-actualization, things like that. And then the third is this idea of depersonalization, that the people that you interact with are you're not having meaningful relationships with them, that you're not able to go to any deeper level. You're checking people out, you're checking boxes, doing NDCs, that there's just not that level of connection.
Okay, well, I guess do we separate into students and pharmacists, or are we going to pull them together? What's the best way to kind of talk about this? Because I think their stress might be different.
Absolutely.
So let's start with maybe pharmacy students. Talk a little bit about what the burnout, I don't want to say categories, but what are the stressors that you find that students really are struggling with?
Yeah, and so I think based on some of the preliminary work that we've done, Tony, is we've seen a variety of different stressors largely associated with different types of workflow balances and just day-to-day stressors that students are experiencing. And so having only been recently removed from pharmacy school, I can say that a lot of our students, as well as myself, during my time in pharmacy school, experienced class stressors, work stressors, balancing those two things in addition to family responsibilities, financial responsibilities being largely implicated as student loans rise and those types of things. And so really, I would say that a lot of the stressors that students are experiencing are kind of universal, but also multifaceted, and that it's not one particular thing that's really overwhelming an individual. It's all of the culmination of all of those things together.
Students are busy these days.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of new requirements with in pharmacy programs that are new since I went to school not that long ago with my Pharm.D. And students have to keep up with that.
And just the competitive nature in general as well, I think, has been increasingly contributory to individual stress levels. And so as it becomes more competitive, both in the academic setting but also in the job market, I think that's something that students are increasingly aware of, and that subsequently is having some negative impact on the educational experience.
Yeah, that increasingly students are interested in residencies because they want, to move into a position, that now maybe didn't require a residency, but now does. And so there's not enough residents for everyone. And so, students are feeling a crunch there as well.
Okay. They, when I talk to students, I keep hearing this kind of idea of monopoly money where they don't really feel the money pinch in terms of the student loans during during their schooling, but certainly after. But tell me a little bit about how all of this kind of combines together and what students can do, because I think you hit the nail on the head where it's not just the money, it's not just the relationships, it's not just the cost of living wherever they are. It's all of these things together. So if you have a combined problem, how do you fix something that has multiple issues or multiple facets?
Yeah, and that's a great question, Tony. And I think to some extent, this is, a potential segue, I guess, into the concept of mindfulness and really just the general awareness that these things are, really just truly things that you're going to be experiencing. And although you might not necessarily feel them now, or you do feel them, but you've managed to compartmentalize them in a way that's not directly affecting you in this current moment, they will be things that affect you moving forward. And so rather than kind of ignoring the potential implications of those things, to be aware and then to engage in meaningful behaviors that actually move you towards accomplishing those things and mitigating that stress, as opposed to waiting until the stress is upon you to actually go about finding a solution to those problems. And so I guess in one word summary, being proactive about engaging in meaningful stress coping mechanisms.
Okay, so that's how they're dealing with the stress, but how did you guys become interested in mindfulness or kind of trying to solve this problem that it's really kind of tough to put a metric on? It's kind of like the pain scale. The pain scale, you ask one person and it's a 10 and another person and it's a 7. What got you guys so interested in mindfulness and helping with stress?
Personally, I had kind of some chronic health problems kind of earlier in my life, and something that was recommended to me, because I was doing some ruminating, I was doing some, things were kind of getting to me, and I was struggling a little bit, some of, kind of dwelling on the future, having a lot of uncertainty. So something that was recommended to me was mindfulness-based stress reduction, which is a program where you learn to treat your thoughts as just that, thoughts, not with as much, meaning or emotion tied to them. Something that can be considered, and dismissed or processed in a more productive way. That's something that I've been kind of using in all, a lot of different aspects of my life, as I've progressed in my career as an academician, to not look at, rejected manuscripts or, uncomfortable encounters as necessarily failures on my character, but as just things that I can learn from, and using mindfulness techniques really can kind of help you process those in a productive way.
So I understand people come to mindfulness in different ways. Matt mentioned how he came to it with maybe some chronic issues earlier. What about you, Logan? How did you come to mindfulness?
And so, thanks for the question, Tony. Really, I kind of came to mindfulness during my time in the Pharm.D program and kind of experiencing some of those stressors that students generally experience while in a rigorous academic program like pharmacy school. And then I actually came across a book called 10% Happier by Dan Harris, which I would recommend for anyone that's interested in getting into mindfulness. But he's a news anchor that had a panic attack during live air. And so he kind of goes through how he came about mindfulness and how he got interested in the actual practice itself. And so kind of identifying with an individual that was a little bit skeptical about the whole thing to begin with and was very science-minded in terms of a lot of the correspondence that he did, I kind of identified with him in a lot of ways in that regard, and then kind of decided to go about the practice myself, or at least give it a try. And so that was kind of how I got initially engaged, and then I saw a lot of the same benefits that he had touted within that book. And so since then, and I think I was like P3 when that started, so since then have kind of maintained at least the semblance of a practice that wanes, obviously, but that's kind of a part of it as well.
Okay, well, I appreciate that. It's always kind of tough to open up about your own struggles, but I think many people, because they see Facebook, and it's just like when the residency acceptances come out, there's maybe 100 residency, look, I matched, for every one I didn't match. So,
Mm-hmm.
there's the heuristic cognitive bias. You're looking at it and you're going, oh, well, I'm going to look at Facebook and see what the match rate is.
Absolutely.
It looks like 199% matched, and I'm in the 1% that didn't. When we know that the match rate's closer to 64%, 36%, and it's just not understanding, not maybe not understanding, but just not seeing things for what they are. But thank you again for sharing that.
And I will say, in addition to that, Matt and I are pretty big Brene Brown people, and so she's a huge proponent of the concept of vulnerability, and vulnerability in and of itself is a lot more cathartic than a lot of other things that you can even do. So just being transparent and honest about, so if more people posted that they didn't match, a lot more people would probably feel better as opposed to only sharing your successes. I think that a lot of how we end up feeling better about our failures is by being honest about them and knowing that other people are experiencing them too. So I think vulnerability will soon become a hotter topic than it already is.
Mm-hmm.
And the PhD world has one of the cruelest 3 words there are, which is publish or perish.
Right.
So
right.
it's the Pharm.D, at least, you may get a degree out of it. My understanding is that 50% of PhD students make it to the finish line. So how does mindfulness reduce stress, and how do you know the stress is being reduced? Because again, we're kind of talking with something amorphous that's a little bit tough to say, oh, look, your blood pressure is down 20 points or something like that. Are you using those kind of physical factors, or things more, what do you do to measure success, I guess?
And again, that's another great question, Tony, and something that has kind of more recently been explored in the literature, but is still kind of up in the air in terms of what the best way of actually evaluating the outcomes of that are. And I think, just like you said, it's a relatively subjective evaluation. And from what we've experienced with some of our work with our students is that stress in general is also a spectra, just like the potential benefits of mindfulness can be a spectra. So individuals can engage in it and utilize it as they see fit to manage their particular stressors or anxiousness or whatever it may be. That being said, the vast majority of what we've seen is still subjective in terms of the reporting data. That being said, it seems like it's benefiting individuals, and I guess at the current time, subjective is not necessarily the worst approach. Mm-hmm. That being said, we've been looking at some additional options for evaluating some ways that it could potentially be evaluated physiologically, those being cortisol levels, blood pressure. We've also thought about doing it with heart rate, those types of things in a variety of different settings.
Well, I'm just so excited for Logan to graduate because, I mean, what more? I'm just thinking about this. Like, as an institution, when you bring somebody in, you're like, okay, they're an expert in history, or they're an expert in this, but they're an expert in stress reduction. What more welcome person could you add to the faculty? Like, this guy's going to be great. It's going to be fantastic.
Let me tell you, I am equivocally excited to graduate.
That's great. But tell me a little bit about how the literature kind of talks about this, and how mindfulness has been successful, or maybe it's had its challenges. And what does the literature say? Does it say, yes, this works, problem solved, people are cured? Or does it say sometimes yes, sometimes no? How does the literature kind of encapture what's going on?
Especially when we talk about mental or health sciences, that those stressors aren't going to go away without dramatic change to the nature of how health systems are organized. It's more of an issue of, can we be better, or can we train people to be better, more able to handle that stress. And so so we've seen studies in medicine with physician residents, some pharmacy data in Ireland, and a lot of different studies where people will go through, they'll either use like an app that is focused on mindfulness-oriented meditation, or they'll go through like an 8-week mindfulness-based stress reduction program. Trainees will go through those, and they'll gain these skills that they can use in their day-to-day lives, for things like, decreasing their rumination, decreasing their negative self-talk, again, adding breathing when they are feeling like they're sensing physiologic feelings in their bodies, their stomach's churning, that they can call on some of these techniques, to move through some of those stressful situations.
And to kind of build on what Matt said, Tony, is that a lot of what we've seen is, and coming from a holistic standpoint, again, just like, antidepressants, the evidence and efficacy for those medications in some populations is better than others. I think that this is kind of a very similar experience to that, in that it's not necessarily going to be a silver bullet, but the purpose is to help individuals identify their thoughts, dissociate from those thoughts, and then realize that those thoughts aren't a universal experience and something that's actually going to come to fruition. And so helping individuals develop things like self-efficacy and being more aware of their own skill set. And that's what we've seen within a lot of the literature, is that the medical residents that we've seen, or at least what it's been reported as, is that those individuals tend to have higher levels of self-efficacy. They believe that their knowledge perceptions are better, so they feel like they have a better understanding of the material and are able to take care of patients more effectively. And so really just getting a more truthful evaluation of yourself is kind of helpful intrinsically in managing that symptomatology, but then also making you a better practitioner.
Yeah, and mindfulness, to put in a nutshell, is being in the moment, right? Can we be more present? And certainly that's increasingly, with the attention to emotional intelligence and a lot of different areas about making meaningful interactions in healthcare. There's been a call for how could mindfulness better equip practitioners to engage with patients.
Well, I have 3 8-year-old daughters, and as a parent, I've been told, and this has been somewhat effective, that when you're seeing emotions, you want to stay principle-based. So that means in my head, as they're screaming, hitting each other, whatever they're doing that it's just driving me nuts, I'm saying I just want to model the behavior that I would want them to have. I would want to model the behavior as a parent that they would have. And the other trick or hack that I got was get rid of your notifications on your mobile device. So
Yeah.
I have the social media on there, but there are no little red bubbles with numbers on there anymore. Tell me a little bit about some tips and tricks that you have for pharmacists or pharmacy students that maybe you've come across to help them, because some pharmacy students are parents and some pharmacists are parents, and they have these multiple stressors. What have you guys come across?
It's certainly, breathing. So being mindful of, taking breaths when you do sense in your, wherever you feel stress, a lot of, maybe it's in your throat and your stomach, to recognize that, that you're feeling stressed and to engage in some breathing. But then, another, as a parent myself, to realize that, if I had an interaction with, my kid that maybe wasn't the best, to not dwell on that and to try to get away from the negative self-talk. I think is a big thing that, for me personally, that mindfulness has, as a practice, and having some training in there, I've been able to do some of that dissociation that Logan was talking about before. So, for students, you get a bad score, to recognize that, that doesn't mean that you're a bad person, or that, that you're a total failure, that it's rather something you can learn from and process, and move forward from.
I would say for myself personally, it's kind of twofold in that nature, where the first half of managing those types of things are dissociating from the thoughts and minimizing this negative self-talk. So if I do poorly on something, to realize that does not exemplify me as a person, that exemplifies that one experience. And so to kind of take each present moment for what it's worth and realize that it doesn't necessarily describe your past, nor does it predict your future. And then the second part of this, at least for me, has been really just the word intentional. And so being more intentional, and like you mentioned this, Tony, being more intentional about how you engage with social media or how you engage with your distractors. And so a lot of times those things can be helpful, like television, and we've seen a lot of other stress reduction techniques like cooking and those types of things that students tend to engage in. And the purpose is to be intentional. So if you're going to make a meal for the purpose of reducing your stress, make the meal, enjoy that experience, be intentional about it, and then move on to the other things that you need to do. It's when we lose that intention that I think that some of those stressors can kind of compound because we're not engaging in things intentionally in a way to minimize them. We're letting them kind of perpetuate and grow.
But like physical fitness, using mindfulness-oriented meditation to support your mental fitness, it's a gradual process, and it takes practice, and it takes an ongoing effort, and so that's something for people to keep in mind too, that they're not, let's say they take the 8-week program in mindfulness-based stress reduction, you're not instantly gonna throw a light switch into a different level of consciousness. Rather you're just have some new tools in your tool belt that you can practice with over the years and decades that follow.
Yeah, I mean, I found CrossFit and I go work out in the morning, but really it's me talking to a bunch of other dads who have many of the same issues that I do as a parent, and then we're working out together, we're talking about those issues, and that works great for one person or our smaller group. But tell me how colleges can maybe facilitate this professional resilience and decrease burnout, because when you're talking about a single class of 100, 120 people, and then a whole college of 500 students, just counting the Pharm.Ds, I'm not discounting the PhDs. I'm just, that's the number I know. But tell me a little bit about how colleges can do this en masse, I guess is the word.
Yeah, so I think from some of the non-scientific literature that I read, just more free reading, I think a lot of what I've seen has been kind of reintroducing some of the individuality back into some of the educational programs and just settings that we've kind of gotten away from, just because historically that hasn't been the most effective way of educating people from an individual standpoint. We're getting back into that, but it's been more challenging. And so I think not necessarily coming up with the one silver bullet that's going to work for every student, but providing a variety of different mechanisms or one mechanism that individuals can use in a variety of ways, such as mindfulness, to kind of use it as they choose and cater it to a way that they can actually engage in a meaningful way. And so at least for me, bringing back some of that individuality, whether that be through one program or through multiple programs, I think would be a huge first step.
Iowa introduces mindfulness as a kind of a concept in our health, wellness, and disease course. Just to provide some initial exposure to students that this is a wellness activity that's out there, whether they want to look into it themselves or, maybe they want to put it on the back burner and do it once they're a practitioner, or, just to know that it's something you could potentially recommend to a friend or family member or a patient, that comes into the pharmacy. But I think colleges can look at, subsidizing, if they want to send some students that maybe are interested to an 8-week program, or give them a workshop on how they might use an app-based mindfulness-oriented meditation strategy in their personal lives. I think there's a lot of things that colleges could work on doing. And I know Iowa is looking at putting into the curriculum more wellness supporting activities for students while they're here on campus. Because we want students to be well and successful and not be overwhelmed with kind of the rigors of college, because when you're overwhelmed, it's hard to do a lot of those things like be present and communicate with patients in the pharmacy and, do the readings for class. It's hard when you're kind of in maybe that more scarcity mindset that being overwhelmed can put someone in. We'd really like people to be in a growth mindset when they're here in a college of pharmacy, able to really be present and take advantage of a lot of the opportunities.
Well, I've asked you a lot of questions. Do you guys maybe want to make one last comment, or what one thing people would take away that if you just had a couple minutes to say, this, if anything, is what I want you to remember?
So I would say that coming almost exclusively from a science background, having done my Pharm.D and then now engaging in the PhD program, that mindfulness and mindfulness-based stress reduction for me was a relatively abstract concept, and I'll be honest with you, I thought at first that it was relatively gimmicky in terms of how I became engaged with it, but then the more that I actually read about it and kind of began my own personal practice, the more that I realized I started to see some of the benefits, being responsiveness as opposed to reactiveness in certain situations, and just a general sense of a higher sense of comfort, I guess, if you will, just in my day-to-day activities and being more present. And so I would say to any pharmacy student or current practitioner that's out there, while at face value, MBSR that isn't necessarily the most approachable thing for a lot of us, especially coming from a science background, that I will say that after reading a lot of the literature and looking at a lot of the science that actually exists out there, that there's a lot of evidence that at least supports its utilization. And again, while not a silver bullet for everyone, I think it's something that should at least be considered, especially for individuals that are experiencing high levels of stress and even burnout.
Yeah, I would just say look into it. There's a lot. I think the iPhone has a built-in breathing app, right? I mean, so that there's something to this kind of breathing and being present thing, and I think increasingly people are coming to want a little more of that in their lives. A little less distraction, a little more focus, and so just finding a way that works for you to to unplug a little bit, to look for some ways to slow down, and to be more present, and whether that's with an app, whether that's by reading a book, exercising, whatever works for you, just to get a little more of that into your lives, would be my recommendation.
Sounds good. Well, Matt and Logan, thanks so much for being on the Pharmacy Residency Podcast.
Thank you, Tony.
Yeah, thanks for having us, Tony.
Hey, thanks for listening to the Pharmacy Residency Podcast. And if you're interested in learning more about the interview process, go over to Amazon.com, where you can check out 100 strong residency interview questions, answers, and rationales in print book, ebook, and audiobook.